It began with a flickering suspicion, a faint whisper in the back of my mind that grew louder with each passing day. For weeks, something had felt off. The way Olivia had become distant, the vague excuses for late nights and unexplained absences. I told myself it was stress, the pressures of her new job, or perhaps my own paranoia. But the unease lingered, gnawing at me. I had been called away on a business trip, a week-long venture across the country to meet with clients. Before I left, a small voice inside me urged me to act. So I installed a hidden camera in our bedroom, not out of malice, but out of desperation for clarity. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. Olivia and I had been married for nearly a decade, and we had 2 beautiful children together. I didn't want to believe she could betray the life we had built, but the doubt was too strong to ignore. The trip was uneventful, filled with long meetings and sleepless nights in unfamiliar hotel rooms. When I returned home, the house was as I had left it. Tidy, quiet, seemingly normal. Olivia greeted me with a smile, the kind that had once melted my heart, but now felt forced. The children were ecstatic to see me, their laughter a welcome reprieve from the storm brewing inside me. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed and Olivia was occupied in the kitchen, I retrieved the footage from the hidden camera. My hands trembled as I pressed play, dreading what I might find. The screen lit up with the familiar image of our bedroom, empty at first. The days passed in fast-forward, Olivia coming and going, nothing out of the ordinary until the 3rd night. That was when I saw him, a man I didn't recognize, entering our home as though he belonged there. Olivia welcomed him with open arms, her demeanor transformed. The warmth and affection she had once reserved for me were now directed at him. My chest tightened as I watched them together, the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. It was a level of intimacy that left no room for doubt. The life I thought we shared had been a lie. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I sat in silence, the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me like a physical force. Anger, sadness, and humiliation warred within me, but beneath it all was a cold, calculating resolve. She had destroyed our marriage, our family. She had taken everything I held dear and discarded it for a fleeting thrill. And now I would take everything from her. The morning after I saw the footage, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Olivia went about her day as though nothing had changed. But for me, everything was different. Every smile she offered, every word she spoke, felt like an insult, a reminder of the lies she had woven around me. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. If I acted impulsively, I'd lose the advantage. No, I needed to be patient, methodical. This wasn't just about leaving her. It was about ensuring that when I did, she'd have nothing left. My first move was subtle, almost imperceptible. Olivia had always trusted me with our finances. It was an arrangement that suited us both, given my career in finance and her disinterest in the details of budgeting and investments. That trust would now become my weapon. I began by slowly moving funds from our joint accounts into one solely under my name. A few $100s here, a few thousand there. Small amounts that wouldn't raise suspicion. Over time, the balance in her name dwindled to almost nothing. Next, I focused on her car. Olivia loved that car. A sleek, white SUV we had purchased just last year. She often joked about how it was her dream car. One evening, I brought up the idea of selling it. I spun a story about trading it in for a newer model, something even better. She hesitated at first but eventually agreed, trusting me to handle the sale. What she didn't know was that the car wouldn't be replaced. I sold it quietly, pocketed the cash, and told her the dealership was processing the new vehicle's paperwork. In the meantime, I insisted she use a rental. Weeks passed, and every time she asked about the car, I gave her a new excuse. Delays at the dealership, supply chain issues, paperwork errors. Eventually, she stopped asking. My next target was her credit cards. Olivia had 2 in her name but rarely used them. Most of our expenses were charged to the joint card, which I had already begun phasing out by redirecting our bills to my personal accounts. I called the banks, posing as Olivia, and requested cancellations due to suspected fraud. The cards were promptly deactivated, leaving her without access to credit. When she discovered this, I feigned surprise and promised to look into it. Of course, I never did. At home, I began documenting everything. I kept a meticulous record of her absences, her late nights, and any evidence that might support my case. I had no intention of simply walking away. I wanted full custody of our children, and for that, I needed to prove her unfit. The hidden camera footage was my ace, but I knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. I started collecting testimonies from people who had seen Olivia with her lover. Neighbors, acquaintances, anyone who could corroborate her behavior. I also hired a private investigator to follow her, gathering photographic evidence of her indiscretions. Every piece of information was another nail in the coffin of her credibility. The children were my priority. Olivia loved them, I didn't doubt that, but her actions showed a reckless disregard for their well-being. She had brought a stranger into our home, into the space where our children slept and played. I made sure to emphasize this in my documentation. I compiled a list of every instance where her neglect or poor judgment had put them at risk. It wasn't enough to prove she had cheated. I needed to demonstrate that she wasn't fit to care for them. Meanwhile, I maintained the facade of normalcy. I smiled when she smiled, laughed at her jokes, and pretended to be the devoted husband she believed I still was. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. The longer she remained unaware of my plans, the more time I had to dismantle her life piece by piece. I wanted her to feel the same sense of betrayal and helplessness that she had inflicted on me. The final piece of my plan involved our home. It was our most significant asset, a sprawling house in the suburbs with a backyard the kids adored. Olivia assumed it would always be ours, a cornerstone of our family. She didn't realize that I had already begun the process of selling it. I reached out to a trusted real estate agent, explaining that I needed the sale to remain discreet. Offers came in quickly, and within weeks the house was under contract. When the time came, I planned to tell Olivia it was a temporary move, something to accommodate my new job. By the time she realized the truth, it would be too late. Step by step, I was stripping away everything Olivia had taken for granted. She had built her affair on the assumption that I would always be there, that the life we had built together would remain intact no matter what she did. But she was wrong. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, and now she would face the consequences. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I felt no guilt for what I was doing. Olivia had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The path ahead was clear, and I would see it through to the end. The life she had destroyed would be hers to rebuild. Alone. The groundwork had been laid. Olivia's life was slowly unraveling, though she didn't yet realize the full extent of what was happening. She was growing frustrated with the mounting inconveniences. The stalled car purchase, the deactivated credit cards, the dwindling household budget. Each time she brought it up, I played the concerned husband, promising to sort things out. But behind her back, I was tightening the noose. With finances and assets under control, I turned my attention to the next phase, the custody battle. The children were my anchor, the only part of my life untouched by Olivia's betrayal. I couldn't allow her recklessness to jeopardize their well-being. My plan had to be flawless. The courts would need irrefutable evidence to grant me full custody, and I was determined to provide it. The private investigator I had hired continued to deliver damning evidence. Photographs, timestamps, locations, everything I needed to paint a clear picture of Olivia's actions. The investigator even managed to capture her lover leaving our home late at night, a detail that would be crucial in court. Combined with the hidden camera footage, I now had a solid case. I began assembling a legal team, carefully selecting attorneys who specialized in family law and high-conflict divorces. I met with them in secret, sharing the evidence I had collected. They were confident in our chances, but they warned me to remain patient. The legal process would take time, and any misstep on my part could weaken our case. I heeded their advice, continuing to act as though nothing was amiss at home. To strengthen my position, I focused on my role as a father. I became more involved in the children's daily lives, attending parent-teacher meetings, coaching their soccer games, and spending quality time with them whenever possible. I wanted the court to see me as the stable, responsible parent, the one who could provide a safe and loving environment. Olivia, on the other hand, was often distracted and absent, her attention divided between our family and her affair. I made sure to document every instance where her behavior fell short. The turning point came one evening when Olivia received a call from her lover while we were having dinner. She stepped away to answer, but the kids noticed her sudden departure. My oldest, confused and a little hurt, asked why Mommy always seemed so busy lately. I reassured them as best I could, but the moment solidified my resolve. Her actions weren't just hurting me. They were affecting our children, too. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with my attorneys to finalize the custody petition. We crafted a narrative supported by the evidence. Olivia's infidelity, her neglect of the children, and the risks she had introduced into our home. The petition was filed quietly, without her knowledge. I wanted to catch her off guard, to ensure she had no time to manipulate the situation or fabricate her own narrative. While the legal process was underway, I continued dismantling her sense of security. I contacted the utility companies, transferring the accounts into her name and setting them to cancel at the end of the month. The mortgage, too, was quietly shifted out of our joint ownership. By the time she realized what was happening, the house would no longer be hers to claim. Despite the chaos I was creating behind the scenes, I maintained the facade of a loving husband. I planned a weekend getaway for the family, something to distract Olivia and keep her unaware of my moves. We spent 2 days at a cabin in the woods, hiking and roasting marshmallows by the fire. Olivia seemed relaxed, even happy, but I knew better. This was the calm before the storm, and I was the one who had orchestrated it. The children, blissfully unaware of the tension between us, clung to me during the trip. They drew pictures of our family and asked if we could do this every weekend. Their innocence broke my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for them, for the life they deserved. When we returned home, the first court summons was waiting in the mail. Olivia opened it with a confused expression, her eyes scanning the document. She looked up at me, searching for answers, but I offered none. Instead, I watched as the realization dawned on her. The cracks in her composure were evident, her confidence wavering for the first time. She tried to confront me, but I deflected, pretending not to understand the legal jargon. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness I had felt when I discovered her betrayal. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and tense conversations. Olivia tried to fight back, but her attempts were feeble. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and her lover's involvement only made matters worse. My attorneys left no stone unturned, presenting a case so airtight that even Olivia's own lawyer seemed resigned to defeat. At the custody hearing, I watched as the judge reviewed the evidence. My heart pounded as I listened to the arguments, the back and forth that would determine the future of my family. When the ruling finally came, it was exactly what I had hoped for. I was granted primary custody of the children, with Olivia receiving limited visitation rights. The judge cited her poor judgment and the risks she had introduced into our home as the deciding factors. As we left the courtroom, Olivia looked at me with a mixture of anger and despair. She had lost everything. Her reputation, her financial stability, and now her children. I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and these were the consequences. My revenge was nearly complete, but there was still one final move to make. The court's decision had been a victory, but I wasn't done yet. Olivia still clung to the remnants of her life, and I was determined to strip away every last thread. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, and jeopardized the stability of our family. I wanted her to feel the depth of that betrayal, to understand what it meant to lose everything. With custody of the children secured, I turned my attention to the house. Olivia hadn't yet realized that the mortgage was no longer in her name. While the court proceedings consumed her focus, I finalized the sale of the property. The papers were signed, and within a week the house, the home we had built together, was no longer hers to claim. The morning the new owners arrived, Olivia was blindsided. She had been preparing breakfast for the kids when the moving trucks pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen as confusion turned to panic. She ran outside, demanding answers from the movers, but they ignored her. When she turned to me, her face was pale, her voice shaking as she asked what was going on. I handed her the paperwork, a calm satisfaction settling over me as I watched her read. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. The house wasn't hers anymore. She had no legal claim, no recourse. I told her it was necessary, a decision made to ensure financial stability for the children. She didn't believe me, of course, but there was nothing she could do. The house was gone, and with it, her sense of security. With nowhere else to go, Olivia was forced to move into a small apartment on the other side of town. It was a far cry from the spacious home she had once enjoyed, and the adjustment was evident. She struggled to make the place feel like home, but it was clear she was out of her depth. The children, accustomed to the comfort of our old house, were reluctant to visit her. They preferred to stay with me, where everything felt familiar and safe. I had one final target, her career. Olivia had always prided herself on her professional achievements. Her job was her identity, a source of pride she clung to even as everything else fell apart. But I knew the truth about her workplace. Through careful digging, I uncovered a pattern of behavior that would raise eyebrows. Frequent absences, missed deadlines, and a few questionable expenses charged to the company account. I compiled everything into an anonymous report and sent it to her employer. The fallout was swift. Olivia was called into a meeting with HR, where she was confronted with the evidence. She tried to defend herself, to explain away the discrepancies, but it was no use. Her reputation at the company was already tarnished, and this was the final blow. By the end of the week, she was let go. Without a steady income, Olivia's situation grew dire. The apartment she had moved into became a strain on her dwindling finances. She began reaching out to friends and family for help, but many of them had distanced themselves after learning the truth about her affair. She was alone, isolated, and struggling to stay afloat. Despite everything, I remained composed. To the outside world, I was the picture of civility. I never raised my voice, never gloated about her downfall. I played the role of the concerned co-parent, always emphasizing the importance of stability for the children. In truth, I relished the quiet destruction of her life. Every step had been deliberate, every move calculated to ensure that she felt the full weight of her actions. One day, as I picked up the children from her apartment, Olivia tried to talk to me. Her voice was different, no longer defiant, but desperate. She asked me if there was any chance we could repair things, if we could find a way to move forward for the sake of the family. Her words were hollow, and I could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't asking out of love or regret. She was asking because she had nothing left. I didn't respond. I simply gathered the kids and left. Her pleas echoed in my mind as I drove away, but they didn't move me. This was the life she had chosen, the consequences of her decisions. There was no going back. In the weeks that followed, Olivia's situation grew worse. She eventually had to sell the few valuables she had left to make ends meet. Her social media accounts, once filled with pictures of a happy family and a thriving career, were now barren. The woman who had once seemed so untouchable was now a shadow of herself. As I stood in the home I now shared with the children, I felt a sense of finality. The revenge was complete. Olivia had taken everything from me, and I had returned the favor tenfold. But as I looked at the faces of my children, I realized that my victory was hollow. They had been caught in the crossfire, forced to navigate a world torn apart by betrayal and vengeance. I knew it was time to move forward. The past was behind me, and the future was theirs to build. Olivia's downfall was complete, but my journey was far from over. I vowed to rebuild, not out of spite, but out of love for my children and the life we still had ahead of us. The storm I had unleashed on Olivia's life had finally run its course. She was left with nothing. No home, no career, no stability. The woman who had once betrayed me so callously was now a hollow shell, stripped of everything she had taken for granted. And yet, As I stood on the other side of my carefully orchestrated revenge, I couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered within me. The children became my focus. They had been through enough upheaval, and I knew it was my responsibility to provide them with the stability they deserved. I enrolled them in therapy, hoping to help them process the changes in their lives. I made an effort to be present, to ensure they knew they were loved and supported. Every laugh, every hug, every moment spent with them reminded me of what truly mattered. They were my reason for moving forward. Olivia, meanwhile, faded further into the background. She attempted to fight for more visitation rights, but the court saw through her facade. The evidence of her neglect and poor decisions was overwhelming, and her petitions were denied. The limited visitation she was granted became strained. The children, especially our oldest, were wary of her, their trust in her shattered. I didn't interfere. I let them form their own opinions, their own boundaries. Olivia's relationship with them was hers to repair, not mine. But even as I rebuilt my life, I couldn't escape the lingering weight of what I had done. The revenge, while satisfying in the moment, had come at a cost. The satisfaction of watching Olivia's downfall had been fleeting, replaced by a quiet guilt that crept in during the stillness of the night. I had justified my actions as necessary, as justice for her betrayal, but now I wondered if I had gone too far. The final act of closure came unexpectedly. One evening, as I was helping the kids with their homework, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the children looked up curiously as I went to answer it. Standing on the porch was Olivia. She looked tired, her face lined with stress and sorrow. There was no anger in her eyes, no defiance, only a quiet resignation. She handed me an envelope and simply said, "I'm sorry." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away. I watched her retreat into the darkness, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Closing the door, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, her words raw and unfiltered. She admitted to her mistakes, to the pain she had caused, and to the understanding that she had destroyed everything she once held dear. She didn't ask for forgiveness, only that I ensure the children knew she loved them, despite everything. The letter stirred something in me. For months, I had been consumed by anger, by a need to make her suffer as I had suffered. But now, holding her words in my hands, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but a release of the hatred that had anchored me for so long. Olivia was no longer the enemy. She was simply a broken person trying to make sense of her own failures. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing left to say. But in the weeks that followed, I found myself letting go of the past. The house, the career, the possessions, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered were the children, their future, and the life I was building for us. I stopped tracking Olivia's life, stopped checking her social media, stopped wondering how she was managing. She was no longer a part of my story, and I was ready to move on. With time, the wounds began to heal. The scars remained, a reminder of what I had endured and what I had overcome. But they no longer defined me. I found joy in the small moments, the laughter of my children, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, the promise of new beginnings. My life was no longer consumed by revenge. It was filled with hope. The final step came one sunny afternoon as I sat in the backyard, watching the children play. I realized I no longer felt the need to dwell on the past. The anger, the bitterness, the need for retribution. All of it had been replaced by a quiet contentment. Olivia's betrayal had been a turning point, but it didn't define me. I was more than what had happened to me. I was a father, a provider, and a man who had faced the storm and come out stronger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The chapter was closed, the story complete. It was time to write a new one, not out of anger or pain, but out of love and resilience. And for the first time, I was ready. The quiet sense of peace I had found in the aftermath of my revenge was a relief, but it wasn't the end of the story. The final chapter was one I hadn't anticipated, a moment of reckoning that would force me to confront everything I had done, and everything I wanted to become. Months after Olivia's letter, I received a call from her attorney. At first, I assumed it was another desperate attempt to renegotiate visitation rights or some plea for financial assistance. But the tone of the call was different. Olivia had decided to leave town. She was moving to another state, hoping for a fresh start away from the wreckage of her old life. The attorney explained that she wanted to formally transfer full custody of the children to me. She would keep her limited visitation rights but intended to reduce her involvement for the foreseeable future. The news hit me harder than I expected. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? Full custody, complete control over our children's future. But hearing it out loud, knowing that Olivia was essentially giving up, stirred something in me. For all her faults, for all the pain she had caused, she was still their mother. And despite everything, I knew the children loved her in their own way. Her absence would leave a void in their lives, one I wasn't sure I could fill. I signed the papers, ensuring everything was legally binding. When the process was complete, I sat down with the kids to explain what was happening. They were surprisingly resilient, taking the news with a mix of sadness and acceptance. My oldest asked if we would ever see Mommy again, and I promised them that we would. I wasn't sure if it was a promise I could keep, but in that moment, it felt like the right thing to say. As Olivia's departure drew closer, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led us to this point. The betrayal, the revenge, the destruction of her life. It had all seemed so necessary at the time. But now, with the dust settled, I wondered if I had gone too far. Had I done what was right for the children, or had I let my anger cloud my judgment? Was there a better way I could have handled things? These questions lingered, unanswered, as I prepared for the next chapter of my life. On the day Olivia left, she came by to say goodbye to the children. I stayed in the background, giving them space to share their final moments together. She hugged them tightly, whispering words I couldn't hear but could imagine. Promises, apologies, assurances of her love. When she turned to leave, her eyes met mine for a brief moment. There was no anger, no bitterness, just a quiet resignation and perhaps a glimmer of gratitude. She nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had transpired, and then she was gone. Life without Olivia was quieter, more stable. The children adapted quickly, finding joy in the routine and security I worked hard to provide. I focused on rebuilding not just for them but for myself. My career flourished as I poured my energy into projects that reignited my passion. I reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from during the chaos, and slowly, I began to open myself up to the idea of new relationships. I wasn't ready to fall in love again, but I was ready to let people in, to share pieces of myself I had kept hidden for so long. One evening, as I was sorting through old files, I came across the hidden camera footage. The sight of it brought back a wave of emotions. Anger, pain, and the cold satisfaction of knowing the truth. I hesitated for a moment, then deleted it. Keeping it no longer served a purpose. It was a relic of a time I had moved past, a reminder of the man I no longer wanted to be. The children grew, their laughter and curiosity filling the house with life. They excelled in school, made new friends, and seemed genuinely happy. Watching them thrive was the greatest reward, the clearest sign that I had made the right choices for them. My role as their father became my anchor, grounding me in the present and guiding me toward the future. Years later, on a sunny afternoon, I sat in the backyard watching the kids play. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. They were a part of my story, a reminder of the lessons I had learned and the strength I had found within myself. Olivia's betrayal had been a turning point, but it wasn't the end. It was a beginning, a chance to rebuild and redefine my life on my own terms. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here, to this moment of quiet contentment. The past was behind me, the future was bright, and for the first time, I truly believed that everything was going to be okay.